although there are some other adding or additive factors.
Across the lands where the Euphrates has flowed since the earliest pages of history, a quiet but undeniable change is unfolding. Waters that once concealed the depths are slowly retreating, and the ground hidden for generations is beginning to appear. Scripture reminds us that there are moments when what has long been concealed is brought into the light, not to create fear, but to awaken reflection. As ancient stones and forgotten structures rise again into view, many are asking whether these events are only natural changes or gentle reminders that time moves according to a greater purpose. If this message speaks to you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Along long stretches of the Euphrates River, the change is no longer subtle. Water levels have steadily fallen year after year, leaving behind expanding banks of dry, cracked ground where currents once flowed without interruption. In some regions, the shoreline has moved so far inward that old docks now stand over empty land instead of water, and boats that once crossed the river daily can no longer travel the same routes. Farmers living near the river report irrigation channels weakening as the flow becomes thinner each season, while exposed riverbeds continue to widen under the sun. Satellite monitoring and regional water reports confirm what local communities have already been witnessing. The Euphrates is gradually losing volume due to prolonged drought conditions, upstream water control systems, and increasing regional heat. The process is not sudden, but continuous, a slow retreat that reshapes the river little by little, month after month. In Revelation 16:12, Scripture states, "The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up." For centuries, this passage has been read both literally and symbolically. Some interpret it as a prophetic reference to a future moment when the river itself would change, while others understand it as a broader image of long-standing boundaries beginning to shift. Today, as the Euphrates continues to recede across multiple regions, the visible decline of one of the world's oldest rivers is drawing renewed attention not only for its environmental impact, but also for the historical and spiritual significance long associated with its waters. As the Euphrates continues to recede, the most striking change is no longer the falling waterline, but what the retreat is quietly leaving behind. Sections of the river that once carried deep, fast-moving currents are now opening into wide plains of exposed earth, stretching far beyond what local residents remember seeing in their lifetimes. From a distance, the newly uncovered ground appears almost motionless, but up close, it tells a different story. Layers of hardened mud cracked by the sun, scattered stones forming unnatural lines, and shallow channels marking where water once moved with relentless force. Old river docks that once stood at the edge of the current now overlook dry land. Wooden posts that used to disappear beneath the surface during high-flow seasons rise several feet above the remaining water, silent measurements of how much the river has withdrawn. In some places, abandoned boats sit tilted on the ground, their hulls coated with dust rather than river sediment, as though time itself paused the moment the water left them behind. The change is happening slowly enough that it rarely creates a single dramatic headline, yet steadily enough that those who live near the river feel the difference every year. Fishing routes that families followed for generations are no longer navigable. Channels that once connected villages across the river have narrowed into thin streams that can sometimes be crossed on foot. Farmers who relied on predictable seasonal flows now watch irrigation canals weaken earlier than expected, adjusting planting cycles as the dependable rhythm of the river becomes less certain. Satellite images confirm the gradual transformation. Over the past decades, the Euphrates has been shrinking in width across multiple regions, its once broad expanse tightening into narrower pathways shaped by drought, upstream water management, and increasing regional heat. None of these changes appear sudden when observed in isolation, but when compared across years, the difference becomes unmistakable. The river is not disappearing overnight, it is retreating step by step, revealing land that has not been visible for generations. What makes the moment feel different is not only the environmental shift, but the sense that each newly exposed stretch of ground seems to carry the quiet weight of something unfinished. The riverbed does not emerge as empty space. It appears layered, marked, and occasionally structured in ways that suggest long histories hidden beneath the surface. And with every passing season, the waterline moves slightly farther back, uncovering terrain that few expected to see within a single lifetime. If this unfolding transformation captures your attention, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for the next chapter of this investigation, and share in the comments what you believe these changes may ultimately reveal. At first, the exposed riverbed appeared to be nothing more than open stretches of hardened earth. The surface seemed uneven, shaped only by years of shifting water and sun-dried mud. But as the waterline continued to move farther away week after week, small irregularities in the ground began drawing closer attention. What initially looked like scattered stones gradually revealed patterns, straight alignments that did not quite match the randomness of natural erosion. In several newly exposed sections, clusters of rock appeared partially embedded in the soil, their edges sharper than surrounding formations. Over time, as more sediment dried and loosened, faint outlines of low walls began to take shape. They did not rise dramatically from the ground, nor did they immediately resemble recognizable ruins. Instead, they appeared quietly, almost reluctantly, as if emerging layer by layer from beneath the surface. Observers who revisited the same locations months apart noticed the difference. Lines that were once barely visible had become clearer, corners more defined, and sections of stone foundations slowly extending farther than expected. Local residents described how certain areas that once seemed empty gradually began to show repeating shapes, stones placed in sequences that suggested human arrangement rather than natural scattering. Archaeological teams working in nearby regions approached these areas carefully, documenting the formations as they became more exposed. Their findings suggested that some of these structures may belong to older settlements long buried beneath layers of river sediment, preserved for generations beneath the constant movement of water. What makes the process remarkable is not the sudden discovery of a single monument, but the quiet unfolding of multiple fragments over time. A section of wall appears one season. Months later, a connected foundation becomes visible nearby. Eventually, what once seemed like isolated stones begins to form the outline of something larger, a structure that had remained hidden simply because the river had covered it for centuries. The land does not reveal everything at once. Instead, it releases its history gradually, allowing each newly exposed detail to raise further questions about what still remains below the remaining layers of earth. As the Euphrates continues to retreat, the slow emergence of these structures suggests that the visible fragments may only represent the earliest layer of what lies beneath. With each passing season, more ground is uncovered, and with it comes the possibility that entire segments of long-forgotten settlements are still waiting to surface. As the Euphrates continues to retreat, the scattered remains of stone foundations and partial walls begin to connect in ways that were not immediately obvious at first. What once appeared as isolated fragments slowly reveals a broader pattern, suggesting the outline of something far larger than a few abandoned structures. Over time, the exposed terrain begins to form the recognizable shape of an ancient settlement, one that had remained concealed beneath layers of river sediment for centuries. From above, the arrangement of the ruins becomes even more striking. Straight corridors of stone appear to trace the paths of former streets, while clusters of rectangular foundations suggest rows of buildings that once stood side by side. Some sections show evidence of thicker outer walls, hinting that the settlement may have once been fortified, possibly serving as a protected city along one of the most important waterways of the ancient world. The positioning of these walls indicates that the city was deliberately planned rather than randomly built, reflecting the architectural discipline of a civilization that understood both defense and urban organization. In several areas, portions of what appear to be large storage chambers or communal structures begin to emerge, their bases preserved by the constant covering of water that shielded them from centuries of erosion. The preserved symmetry of these spaces suggests that the city once played a significant role in regional trade or administration, functioning not merely as a small village, but as a center of activity connected to surrounding territories. The river that now withdraws from its banks may once have flowed directly alongside these structures, supplying transportation, irrigation, and strategic advantage to those who lived there. What deepens the sense of mystery is the unusual state of preservation. While many ancient ruins collapse into scattered debris over time, several segments of this emerging city remain surprisingly intact at their foundations, as though the river had quietly protected them until the present moment. The surrounding silence of the exposed riverbed adds to the atmosphere, creating the impression that the city has not been destroyed in a dramatic event, but rather gradually hidden and forgotten as the river's course shifted across generations. Local observers who revisit the site over successive months report that more sections continue to appear as the waterline moves farther away. Stones that were barely visible weeks earlier now stand fully exposed, and outlines that once seemed uncertain now clearly define the boundaries of streets, courtyards, and structural compounds. The slow pace of the unveiling creates a sense that the land is revealing its history deliberately, not all at once, but in stages, each newly exposed segment raising new questions about the people who once lived there, the events that led to the city's disappearance, and how many more layers still remain concealed beneath the remaining sediment. If this gradual emergence continues, the visible ruins may represent only the outer edge of a much larger ancient city still waiting beneath the surface. Its deeper sections perhaps preserved even more completely than what is already visible today. As more of the ancient ground is uncovered, attention slowly shifts from what can be clearly seen to what cannot yet be fully explained. Along several newly exposed stretches of the Euphrates, observers have begun to notice openings in the terrain, dark recesses in the earth, that do not resemble ordinary erosion. At first glance, they appear to be nothing more than small cavities formed by collapsing sediment, yet some of these openings reveal shapes that seem unusually defined, edges that suggest depth rather than shallow hollows. During the day, these formations remain silent, blending almost naturally into the landscape. But as evening settles over the riverbanks and the surrounding environment grows quieter, stories begin to circulate among nearby communities. Some residents describe hearing low, distant vibrations late at night, sounds that seem to carry through the ground rather than through the air. Others mention brief echoes resembling metallic reverberations, faint enough to leave uncertainty, yet clear enough to be remembered. None of these reports provide definitive explanations, and many of them may eventually be traced to natural underground movement or shifting geological layers. Still, the combination of newly exposed terrain and unfamiliar sounds has created an atmosphere that feels different from what the region has experienced before. Rather than presenting a single dramatic discovery, the landscape appears to be revealing possibilities step by step. A newly exposed section of land draws curiosity. An unusual opening in the soil invites closer inspection. A faint sound heard at night raises another question. Each detail alone may seem insignificant, yet together they form a quiet sense that the surface of the riverbed is only the beginning of a much deeper story. What lies beneath these openings remains largely unknown, not because it is intentionally hidden, but because much of the ground has only recently become accessible for the first time in generations. Those who visit the area often describe an unusual contrast: the visible silence of the exposed land above, and the growing curiosity about what might exist below. The river, which for centuries concealed its depths beneath constant movement, is now stepping back just enough to allow glimpses of what had remained out of sight. No conclusions are being declared, no final explanations offered. Instead, the moment feels like an invitation, an unfolding path that encourages observation rather than assumption. As this investigation continues, The next step is not to decide immediately what these openings or distant sounds may represent, but to follow where the evidence gradually leads. With each season that the waters retreat a little farther, the land reveals another small fragment, and the story moves forward quietly, asking only one thing: to keep watching closely. The Euphrates has never been only a river. Long before modern borders were drawn across maps, its waters shaped the rise of entire civilizations, feeding fields, sustaining cities, and carving pathways through lands that would later become the crossroads of empires. For thousands of years, communities settled along its banks not simply because water was available, but because the river offered stability, a dependable rhythm that determined planting seasons, trade routes, and the expansion of early societies. Generations were born, lived, and disappeared beside the same flowing current, trusting that the river would remain constant even as kingdoms rose and fell around it. Ancient historians describe the Euphrates as one of the great lifelines of the world, a boundary that often marked the limits of power and influence for successive empires. Armies crossed it, merchants followed it, and travelers used it as a natural guide through lands that were otherwise difficult to navigate. Over time, the river became more than geography. It became a symbol of continuity, representing the idea that some elements of the earth endure even while human history changes. That is why the present moment feels different. When a river that has remained steady for millennia begins to visibly withdraw, it draws attention not only from scientists and environmental observers, but from historians, theologians, and those who see meaning in long historical patterns. In several ancient writings, rivers are often described as markers of transition, places where one era quietly gives way to another. The Euphrates, in particular, has been referenced across multiple historical traditions as a boundary between worlds, between fertile lands and deserts, between empires, and sometimes between one historical age and the next. Whether those references are interpreted symbolically or historically, they all point to the same idea. Certain geographical landmarks hold significance far beyond their physical form, because they have witnessed the turning points of human civilization. Today, as the waters gradually recede and sections of the riverbed continue to appear, the unfolding changes are inviting people to look again at a location that has influenced history more than most places on Earth. The transformation is not only environmental, it also carries the quiet reminder that even the most familiar features of the world are capable of change. What once seemed permanent can shift, slowly and almost unnoticed at first, until the difference becomes undeniable. For now, the river continues to move, though in narrower paths than before. The exposed ground remains silent, offering no immediate explanation for what the coming years may reveal. Yet the steady retreat of the Euphrates is already doing something powerful. It is drawing attention back to a place that has always stood at the center of human history, encouraging observers to watch carefully, to record what unfolds, and to recognize that some moments only reveal their meaning long after they begin. As the waters of the Euphrates continue to withdraw, the visible changes along its banks raise a question that grows more compelling with each passing season. The exposed riverbed, the emerging foundations, and the gradual uncovering of ancient ground all suggest that what has already appeared may represent only the surface layer of a much deeper historical landscape. Beneath the remaining sediment, there may still lie sections of forgotten settlements, buried pathways, or structures that once stood at the center of thriving communities whose names have long since faded from memory. Archaeologists working across the broader region often describe ancient river valleys as layered archives of human civilization. Over centuries, floods deposit new sediment, settlements rise and fall, and the physical traces of earlier generations become sealed beneath the earth. The Euphrates, having flowed continuously through the same lands for thousands of years, is likely to hold countless such layers beneath its bed. As the waterline retreats, even small exposures of ground can offer clues about what may exist further below: fragments of pottery, traces of stone alignments, or unusual patterns in the terrain that hint at structures not yet fully visible. What makes the present moment remarkable is the pace at which these possibilities are beginning to re-enter public awareness. For decades, many of these locations remained hidden simply because they were inaccessible beneath deep water. Now, as the river gradually steps back, areas that had not been seen for generations are becoming reachable once again. Each newly revealed stretch of land invites careful observation, and each observation raises new questions about how much history still rests beneath the remaining layers of soil. The unfolding story is not defined by a single discovery, but by a sequence of quiet revelations, small pieces appearing one at a time, forming a broader picture only when viewed together. Some of what lies beneath may eventually be documented and studied, while other sections may remain untouched for years, waiting for the right conditions to bring them into view. The process is gradual, and its full significance may not be understood immediately. Yet, it is precisely this slow unveiling that draws attention, encouraging observers around the world to watch the region more closely than before. For now, the Euphrates continues its retreat, leaving behind a landscape that seems to be opening page by page, as though history itself were being read in reverse. What has already emerged has begun to reshape how people look at this ancient river, but the greater mystery may still remain hidden beneath the ground that has yet to appear. If you want to follow every new discovery and investigation connected to the Euphrates, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below, because what has been revealed so far may only be the beginning.